Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. So I'm going to go over my optimal draft strategy suggestions with the first pick in the draft. So assuming you've got the 101, just to sort of preface all this, I'll be doing this for multiple videos going forward. I'll probably highlight picks 1, 4, 7, 10, and 12, something like that. Give you guys a gist of what I think the best strategies are going to be based off of wherever you're picking in the draft. Don't want to do it for all 12 spots because you get to a point where you're sort of just at the whim of how the draft goes a little bit. So like ADPs aren't going to be exactly how your draft goes. So I don't want to do all 12. I think we'll do 4 or 5 here. I'm basing all of these ADPs off of the Underdog ADP platform right now. It's sort of the best general accurate ADPs that we've got right now. We will get more information in terms of what ADPs are going to be as we get further on into the offseason, so I'll probably update these videos, maybe do some platform-specific stuff as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun, really fun making these videos, sort of seeing what I think you can do with each spot in the draft. Just looking at all this, I think you can build a really good team pretty much regardless of where you draft in this year's drafts, but really fun to see what we can do here, and if you have any disagreements or anything, let me know. So yeah, with that, let's get into it. Let's start with pick 1. Starting off with round 1, this one's pretty easy. You probably don't need my help. You don't need me to tell you that Christian McCaffrey is the clear 101 here. And I really can't even think of a format other than a Superflex format where I would even consider anything else. McCaffrey just lapped the field at the position last season, had 100 more points than any other running back in fantasy last year. He should be the running back 1 again, assuming he can stay healthy. And even if the 49ers do try to limit his workload a little bit, there's just no reason for me to see him potentially decreasing that workload enough that it's going to matter. So don't get cute. You're taking McCaffrey at the 101 and just be happy that you got him. Next up in rounds 2 and 3 is where things get a little bit more interesting here, and it is going to depend on the platform a little bit. And in general, though, I do sort of like to approach that sort of semi-hero RB build with the 101. You've got the hero at the running back position this season. You've got Christian McCaffrey, so you can have a lot of flexibility here and really sort of try and hammer out the wide receiver position. It's important to note, too, that we do see the wide receiver position sort of dry up really early this year. There was a lot of success with people who went 0 RB last season. A lot of running backs sort of flamed out and didn't perform at a high level last season. So we're seeing the ADPs of these wide receivers get pushed up a lot, and that means the running backs are going a lot later. And that gives us a lot of opportunity here to get some really good running backs at around 4 or 5 turn, and then we can still really focus on getting the wide receivers here. So I do recommend going wide receiver at this turn, unless there's really significant value somewhere else that wouldn't be a quarterback or a tight end. So you would need a running back to have slipped quite a bit for it to make a difference for me. So in general, I've been looking to get 2 of guys like Mike Evans, DK Metcalf, Malik Neighbors, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, guys in that tier, Chris Olave, just those general tiers of players. I'd want to leave that draft this turn with 2 of those guys, and the only reason I wouldn't do that is if maybe either Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley or maybe Jahmyr Gibbs slipped, but Gibbs is probably never going to slip that far. JT probably won't either. Taylor or Saquon, his ADP is right around pick 21, so it's possible that he would make it there. I could convince myself to go Saquon at round 2 or at the round 2-3 turn here if he's there. So keep that in mind. But in general, I think you're going to be looking at going wide receiver here, and just take the 2 best guys available in your mind. Next up, in rounds 4 and 5, I think it's really imperative to me that we end up with no more than 2 running backs after the first 5 rounds. I say this because you're spending a really high-end draft pick on a running back in round 1. You're spending the 101 on McCaffrey, so it gives you a lot of flexibility to sort of lean on him on your roster and then build out your wide receiver room outside of that. Again, on top of that, this is a year where the wide receivers are going really early, so if you don't end up with at least 2, ideally 3 wide receivers at this point in the draft, you're putting yourself in a spot where you're just not going to have a very competitive wide receiver room because you didn't get a round 1 wide receiver. You didn't get a top 23 pick at the wide receiver position, and then you're ending up with only 1 or 2 wide receivers at that point. So you definitely want to make sure you've got 2 wide receivers at this point at a minimum, and I don't want to be drafting more than 2 running backs. So assuming that you're at this spot, you've got 1 running back and 2 wide receivers, sort of like what I've been suggesting. This would still be my favorite spot to grab that second running back. There are a lot of really good running backs still available at this round 4 or 5 term, and that's why I don't think we should be prioritizing the position at rounds 2 and 3. So guys like Isaiah Pacheco, James Cook, Josh Jacobs, Rachaad White, all those guys could easily be top 10 guys for us and still sitting for us at this turn. A lot of them go even a little bit later than that, but they're not going to make it to you at the 6-7 turn. If you only have 1 running back at this point, I would try to target one of those guys for sure. And other than that, I think I'd be looking at the tight end position. I really like guys like Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, and Dalton Kincaid. If any one of those guys is left, I would definitely be extremely interested there. It's kind of a bit of a dead zone for the wide receiver position here. The guys being drafted around here, I just don't really like a lot of. You're getting guys like Hollywood Brown being drafted around here, Keenan Allen, not guys that I'm super high on. So the only two wide receivers that I'd even consider here are Jaden Reed and Terry McLaurin. But even that, I'm not super stoked about at this ADP. So in general, I don't really want to be taking a wide receiver here. And that sort of leans even more into why I don't want to be drafting two running backs early. Because like if you go running back to start your draft, you're going to feel like you need to take wide receivers at this spot. And I just don't really like the value here. And then one thing I want to highlight is you could potentially draft a quarterback at this spot. Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud are perfectly fine picks. It's just that generally I like to wait for the value later on in the draft, so I don't do that a whole lot. But if you want to look at the quarterback here, either one of those guys would be okay, and I wouldn't mind the draft pick there. Next up, we've got round 6 and 7, and generally my rule of thumb this season has sort of been that I want to have my tight end and my quarterback sorted after round 7. Especially just because I think there's a lot of value at the quarterback position and tight end position going a little bit later. At the quarterback position, I'd be targeting guys like Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, Dak Prescott. Again, for the quarterback position, I do highly recommend you take into account just who you're drafting with and all that. On Underdog, a lot of these guys you could maybe get around later than this, so you could wait till that 8-9 round turn. Just keep it in mind, I know it's a little bit risky. I don't want to miss out on like the top 10 of the quarterback position, so keep that in mind. But I don't want to necessarily advocate for not taking these guys and then see them get swept up a little bit, just because at this turn here, there's not a lot of flexibility for you. You've got to wait 22 picks in between picks. You're going to have to be a little bit more aggressive. ADPs aren't necessarily as important for you here. So I do recommend trying to get one of those guys, but if you want to play the ADP game and hope they make it back to the 8 or 9 turn, you can do that. And then the tight end position here, it's sort of your last shot to get a good tight end. You got Evan Ingram or David Njoku. Njoku is maybe likely to make it to you at the 8-9 turns. You could look at him there, but I'd potentially look at least making sure you've got one of those two positions sorted out here, because if you've got none of them, you're probably going to have a hole in your lineup going into week 1. Other than that, though, you're probably looking at just building out a wide receiver room. You should be super strong at the running back spot because you've got Christian McCaffrey and then probably a top 10 guy on top of that with around 4 or around 5 picks. So some of the receivers I love taking here, we've got Deontay Johnson. I talked about him a lot. I love him this year. Ladd McConkey, he's a great value. Christian Watson, I like him. JSN, shot to bounce back this season, be a year 2 breakout. And Keon Coleman's also worth taking a look at as well. And then if you're in a league where you do only start 2 wide receivers, I think you could look at adding a third running back at this spot. There are really some great values here. I like David Montgomery again this year. Alvin Kamara is a great value here, and Najee Harris is a pretty good value as well. Moving into rounds 8 or 9, if you still need a quarterback or a tight end, this is probably your last chance to get an actually impact player at the position. Otherwise, there's just going to be streaming those positions. So it's imperative to me, especially at the quarterback position, that we do get one of those guys. I highly recommend making sure you have one. If you don't, Jordan Love is probably your best value here. He's currently being drafted 99th overall, so you would have a shot to get him at that 8-9 turn. That's pick 96, pick 97. So you could get him there. Again, it's just risky to wait that long just because at this spot, all the quarterbacks might be gone. So that's sort of why I recommended taking them at the round 6-7 turn. But if you don't have a quarterback, it's very important to make sure you grab one of those guys unless the top 10 are all gone. On top of that, it's also really important to me that we get one of those top 7 tight ends in my rankings. So David Njoku would be your last shot at getting one here. If you wanted to go one spot lower, I think Jake Ferguson is interesting. You could take him here as well. And other than that, I'd probably just be looking at grabbing the best value on the board, regardless of position. I really like some of the values still in rounds 8 and 9. Zach Moss is available. Shaheed's available. Raheem Mostert, Jonathan Brooks, Samir White, Jalen Warren. All those guys are available right around this area, and I think if you can get one of those guys, that's super great. Look at the roster construction there, but another thing that I'll highlight is, again, look at how many good running backs I mentioned here. There's only one right wide receiver that really stood out, so I think, again, it sort of highlights that we do want to make sure we get those wide receivers early after taking Christian McCaffrey, because, again, there's still a lot of really great values at the running back position later on. And then from that point on, from rounds 10 on, this is going to be pretty independent of ADP, so we'll probably see a similar set of advice that I'll give here for pretty much regardless of where you're drafting from. But I think at this point, it really is going to be just targeting upside above everything else. One of my personal favorite things to do is just go look at some of the teams you drafted last season, look at the guys that you drafted to be on your bench, so rounds 10 or later, and just be honest with yourself about how many of those guys actually stayed on your roster over the course of the entire season. They've got a remarkably low hit rate there, so really you are just looking for upside. You're going to be cycling through these guys, and where you win your leagues, where you get those guys that hit, where you drafted Kyren Williams last season, or Raheem Mostert, or Puka Nacua, we want to target those upside hits, because if those hit, those actually make a difference for us, and if you grab a guy that ends up being flex-worthy on occasion, it's just not going to make a huge difference for your roster. It's not going to move the needle for you at all, so I do highly recommend targeting upside, and on top of that, I think in general we want to balance running backs and wide receivers. On top of that, I love targeting handcuffs. And at the 101, I do highly recommend grabbing Elijah Mitchell. Just a nice, cheap insurance policy on the best player in fantasy. You don't want to completely tank your season if Christian McCaffrey were to go down. And then at the wide receiver position, I would be targeting youth. Target good offenses as well. Guys like Jameson Williams are great later on. Rashid Shaheed was another guy highlight. You could look at guys like Jalen Polk going late. Joshua Palmer is an option. Quentin Johnson. A lot of later guys that just, they're on good offenses and there's a lot of unknowns. That's why they're being drafted that late. But you want to target that upside. And then the other advice I'll give is just get your guys at this point. ADP sort of stops mattering this late in the draft anyway, especially at the turn. You're waiting 22 picks in between. Just make sure you get the guys you want. Don't try and get cute with the ADP game, and just make sure you're happy with the guys that you're getting on your roster. And then just to wrap things up here, just some general tips for the 101. I've said it a couple times already, but playing the ADP game really isn't much of an option for you. There are 22 picks in between each of your set of picks, so it's just important to make sure you get your favorite players on the board. It's very rare that you're going to have a guy on your the highest of your rankings that's still 22 picks behind ADP right now, or 22 picks ahead of ADP. So my point being is, in general, just take your best players unless you're really confident that you're just way higher on them than you should be, and then maybe you can get them in the next turn. But in general, you're going to want to be targeting just making sure you get your guys. You do lose that flexibility. It's sort of the price you pay for drafting at the turn. And then I also just want to highlight that you really shouldn't be afraid of going hero RB. It's almost sort of, not that I'm saying you should try for it and force yourself into it, but drafting Christian McCaffrey, it really sets you up to play that hero RB strategy better than any other draft pick. He could easily carry an entire running back room on his own, so I think that's totally okay. And then the other thing I'll just mention as well, sort of regardless of what I said here, just be mindful of the ADPs. Again, I pulled all these ADPs based off of Underdog's ADP. That's the best we've got right now. Those are the competitive for-money drafts that are happening right now, and we're still in early July, so there's a lot that can happen here, but just keep that in mind. Your platform might be a little different. We could see wide receiver be emphasized a little bit less, and that would shift things a little bit. Wouldn't change the 101 for me. Would maybe change what we're looking at for the later rounds. If you see a platform where the wide receivers are getting shifted down, maybe you can look at taking another running back in rounds 2 or 3, and then you'll have more wide receiver options later on. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you look at your ADPs and understand that. But I think in general, this is a good outline of what I'd be looking to build for a roster. So that'll do it for the optimal draft strategy video with the #1 overall pick. Up next, I'll do an optimal draft strategy going over what I would do with an early middle first round pick. So that'll probably be pick 4, go over the ADPs there, go over what I'd be looking to draft, and just sort of give you my general best advice in terms of how I'd be looking to build out my roster. Again, all of these need to be taken with a grain of salt. So I'm trying to give a lot of caveats in terms of different ways you can build your roster. You want to make sure that you're always attacking value, make sure that you're not overweight or underweight at a certain position, and make sure that you are being really intentional about how you're building your roster. So lots of ways you can slice the pie here, lots of different things we can do, but I really fun making these videos. I'm going to keep doing this. Gonna finish 3 or 4 more of these videos going forward. Gonna give you guys some mock drafts as well. Thinking about doing some live drafts as well with you guys. I'll get into some sleepers. I'll get into some ADP or platform-specific ADP comparisons, auction values, more auction content, more just player takes and all that, and it's just gonna be a lot of fun. So gonna keep putting out several videos throughout the course of the rest of the off season. Just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It's free. That way I can help you win your championships this season. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. I really appreciate you guys. If you made it this far, please do give the video a thumbs up, and I'll catch you with the next one. So peace. Have a good one. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter @RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.